I'm so glad you're here. Because what I'm about to tell you, it's the kind of story that you think only happens in movies. The kind of nightmare you pray never darkens your own doorstep. It's a story about how the person you love most in the world can be used as a weapon against you, and how the four walls you built with a lifetime of love can become a prison you're ordered to hand over the keys to. It all came to a head on a Tuesday afternoon. One of those deceptively beautiful autumn days when the sun is golden and the air is crisp. It was on that beautiful, terrible day that my daughter-in-law, Tiffany, slapped me across the face. The sting of it was sharp, shocking, but it was nothing compared to the ice that flooded my veins when she held out her perfectly manicured hand, her voice devoid of all emotion, and said the 5 words that shattered my world. "Give me your house keys." But to understand the poison in that moment, you have to understand the sweetness that came before it. You see, my life wasn't always a battleground. For 35 years, it was a sanctuary, a home I built with my husband, Richard. This house wasn't just wood and plaster, it was a living album of our lives. Every scuff mark on the hardwood floor in the hall was from our son, Mark, learning to ride his first tricycle. The faint scent of lavender and old books in the living room was the ghost of 1,000 quiet evenings Richard and I spent reading by the fire. He was a good man, a kind man, a structural engineer who built bridges, and he built the bridge of our family with Ajadania, same strength and care. When cancer took him from me 5 years ago, the silence in this house was deafening. But he left me with 2 things: this home, free and clear, and our son, Mark. Mark was my world. He had his father's gentle eyes and his steady hands. After Richard passed, Mark was my rock. He'd come over every Sunday for dinner, fix the leaky faucet I'd been ignoring, and just sit with me, sharing the comfortable silence his father and I once had. He was a good son, and I poured all the love I had left into him. So when he met Tiffany, I was overjoyed. She was dazzling. That's the only word for it. She had a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She worked in marketing, she said, and she had this incredible energy, this ambition that seemed to perfectly complement Mark's quieter nature. She showered me with affection from the very beginning. She called me Mom, brought me flowers for no reason, and always complimented my cooking, even when I knew I'd left the roast in for 5 minutes too long. "Oh, Evelyn, you're a marvel," she'd say, squeezing my hand. "I hope I can be half the wife and mother you are someday." I ate it up. I was so desperate for Mark to be happy, so relieved that he'd found someone, that I welcomed her with open arms. I saw her as the daughter I never had. When they got married, I gave them a significant portion of my savings to help with a down payment on a condo downtown. It was a beautiful place, but Tiffany would often sigh dramatically when she visited my house. "Oh, this place is just real," she'd say, running a hand over Richard's old leather armchair. "It has history. Our condo is so sterile." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. I didn't see the seed of envy being planted. I didn't understand that she wasn't admiring the history. She was assessing the property value. For 2 years, things were blissfully normal. Or so I thought. They'd come for Sunday dinners. Tiffany would tell glamorous stories about her marketing campaigns, and Mark would look at her with pure adoration. I was happy, truly. I'd look at them across my dining room table, the table Richard and I had bought at an antique fair, and I'd feel a sense of peace. My family was whole. But little things started to feel off. It began with money. Small things, at first. "Mom, we're a little short for the car payment this month. Tiffany's commission was delayed," Mark would say, looking embarrassed. Of course, I'd write a check. Then it was bigger things. A new furnace for their condo. A medical bill for Tiffany after a minor procedure. Each time, Mark was the one to ask, his eyes always downcast, while Tiffany stood behind him, rubbing his back, her face a perfect mask of worried sympathy. I never questioned it. He was my son. This was his family. What was my money for, if not to help them? I ignored the little voice in my head, the one that sounded suspiciously like Richard, whispering that something wasn't right. I ignored the fact that Tiffany was always wearing a new designer handbag, or that they'd just gotten back from a weekend trip to Napa, while claiming they couldn't make their car payment. Love, I've learned, can be a very effective blindfold. The polite requests slowly morphed into a sense of expectation. The Sunday dinners became less about family connection and more like financial planning sessions, with Tiffany gently guiding the conversation toward their expenses and my assets. And I, like a fool, kept my heart and my checkbook open, because the alternative, the thought that this beautiful, charming woman was anything other than what she seemed, was too painful to consider. I was living in a beautiful, meticulously crafted lie, and the architect of that lie was smiling at me from across my own dinner table, already picturing where she'd put her own furniture. If you're watching this, and any of this sounds even remotely familiar, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. I need to know these stories are getting out there, that other people can see the red flags before they turn into a full-blown inferno. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far my story of waking up has traveled. The transition from loving matriarch to a walking ATM was so gradual, so cleverly managed, that I barely noticed it was happening. It was like being in a room where the oxygen is slowly being depleted. You only realize you can't breathe when you're already gasping for air. Tiffany was a master of emotional manipulation, and my son, my dear Mark, was her willing puppet. After a while, her compliments about my house started to change. They took on a different tone, one that was less admiring and more proprietary. She'd walk through the rooms, not with the warmth of a guest, but with the critical eye of a new owner. "You know, Evelyn," she'd say, tapping a wall in the guest bedroom, "if we ever moved in here, this wall would have to go. It would open up the space so much for a nursery." A nursery. The word was a silver bullet, aimed directly at my heart. She knew my deepest wish was to be a grandmother. She dangled that possibility in front of me like a carrot, a beautiful, perfect reason for me to give them whatever they wanted. Mark would just nod along, a placid smile on his face. "That's a great idea, honey," he'd say. "Mom's house has such great bones." My house. Not our house, if we all lived there. My house. The language was subtle, but the implication was clear. It was a temporary arrangement. I was just the caretaker until they were ready to take over. I remember one Sunday, I'd spent all day making Richard's favorite meal, pot roast with roasted root vegetables and homemade gravy. It was a labor of love, a way for me to feel close to him. Tiffany arrived, looking stunning in a white cashmere sweater, and wrinkled her nose. "Oh, Evelyn, pot roast. It's a bit heavy, don't you think? So old-fashioned." She then pulled a small container of quinoa salad from her designer tote bag. "I'm on a cleanse," she announced to the room. "Doctor's orders. Have to keep my body in peak condition." She smiled sweetly at Mark, who immediately started fussing over her, getting her a special glass of filtered water with lemon. I stood there, holding a platter of food I'd cooked for 6 hours, feeling like a relic. My food, my traditions, my love-it was all being dismissed as old-fashioned. Mark didn't even seem to notice. He just watched Tiffany with that same blind adoration, as if she were the sun and he was just a planet caught in her orbit. The financial requests became more brazen. One evening, Mark called me, his voice strained. "Mom, Tiffany and I have an incredible opportunity. A friend of hers is starting a new tech company, and we can get in on the ground floor. It's a sure thing, but we need an investment of $50,000. I was stunned into silence. $50,000. That wasn't a car payment. That was a huge chunk of the retirement fund Richard and I had painstakingly built. "Mark, that's a lot of money," I stammered. "It's an investment, Mom," he insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge I recognized. It was Tiffany's desperation, channeled through him. "Think of it as an investment in our future, in your grandchild's future." there it was again. The grandchild. The magical, hypothetical being who could justify any demand. I told him I needed to think about it, that I had to talk to my financial advisor. The line went cold. The next day, Tiffany called me. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Evelyn, darling, I'm so sorry if our request startled you. Mark is just so excited about providing for our family. He sees this as a way to finally step out from his father's shadow, you know? To build something of his own. I know you want that for him, don't you?" Every word was a perfectly sharpened dart. She was questioning my love for my son, my belief in his potential, all while positioning herself as his biggest supporter. She made me feel that if I said no, I was the one holding him back. I was the obstacle to his happiness. That's when my best friend and neighbor Carol stepped in. Carol had been my neighbor for 30 years. She was a no-nonsense retired nurse who could spot a lie from a mile away. She'd seen Tiffany's act from the beginning. "Evelyn, open your eyes," she told me over coffee in my kitchen one morning. "That girl is playing you like a fiddle. A $50,000 investment in a company you've never heard of? She's bleeding you dry." I tried to defend them. "She loves him, Carol. And Mark is just trying to build a life for them." Carol set her mug down with a firm click. "He has a life. He has a good job as an accountant. What he doesn't have is a backbone. She's not building a life with him. She's liquidating yours." Her words stung, but they also planted a seed of doubt that started to grow. I began to pay closer attention. I noticed how Tiffany would cut Mark off mid-sentence to correct him. I saw how he'd flinch almost imperceptibly when she gave him a certain look. I realized that when they were at my house, Mark rarely spoke to me directly. He would speak through Tiffany. She was his spokesperson, his manager, his handler. He had become a background character in the story of his own life. The final straw, before the slap, was the incident with my wedding ring. Richard had given me a beautiful, simple diamond ring. It wasn't massive, but it was perfect. It had never left my finger, except when I was gardening. One afternoon, Tiffany was helping me clean up after lunch. I'd taken my ring off to wash the dishes and had placed it on the small ceramic dish by the sink. We talked, we cleaned, and then they left. An hour later, I realized my ring was gone. Panic seized me. I searched everywhere. I upended the dish, checked the drain, scoured the countertops. It was gone. I called Mark, my voice trembling. He said he would ask Tiffany. He called back 20 minutes later. "Mom, Tiffany found it. It must have fallen into her purse by accident when she was putting her lipstick away. Silly, right? We'll bring it over on Sunday." I felt a wave of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, creeping dread. It didn't fall into her purse by accident. The ring dish was nowhere near where she'd left her purse. It was a test. She was testing the boundaries. She was seeing what she could take, how much I would tolerate before I broke. When she returned it on Sunday, she was all apologies and bright smiles. "Oh, Evelyn, I felt so terrible. I can't believe how clumsy I am." But as she placed the ring in my palm, her eyes met mine, and for a split second, the mask slipped. I saw a look of cold, calculated triumph. And in that moment, I knew Carol was right. This wasn't about love or family. This was a hostile takeover. The knowledge that you're being played is a heavy, suffocating thing. It changes everything. Suddenly, every smile seems like a smirk. Every kind word feels like a calculated move in a game you never even knew you were playing. After the incident with my wedding ring, the fog of denial I had been living in finally began to dissipate, replaced by a harsh, unwelcome clarity. I started saying no. Not in a confrontational way at first. I did it gently, with excuses. When Tiffany suggested they borrow my car for a weekend because hers was acting up, I told her I had a series of appointments I couldn't miss. When she hinted that I should co-sign a loan for her new side business, a vague and costly-sounding venture involving imported textiles, I told her my financial advisor had strictly forbidden me from taking on any new liabilities. Each no was met with a frosty silence from Tiffany and a flurry of confused, pleading texts from Mark. Mom, what's going on? You've never been like this. Tiffany's really hurt. She thinks you don't like her anymore. He couldn't see it. He couldn't see that her hurt was just frustration that her primary source of funding was drying up. She had woven herself so completely into the fabric of his life that he couldn't distinguish his own feelings from hers. My resistance, however gentle, was setting the stage for a major confrontation. I could feel it building, like the pressure before a thunderstorm. They stopped coming for Sunday dinners. The excuse was that they were too busy, but I knew the real reason. There was no benefit to visiting me if they were going to leave empty-handed. The silence from them was both a relief and a source of profound sorrow. I missed my son, the real Mark, the one who existed before he became Tiffany's echo. I grieved for the relationship I thought we had, even as I recognized how toxic it had become. The storm broke 2 weeks later. They showed up at my door on a weeknight, unannounced. It was the first time I'd seen them in almost a month. Mark looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. Tiffany, however, was glowing. She was dressed in a power suit, holding a leather-bound portfolio, and she radiated an unnerving level of confidence. She didn't wait for an invitation, just breezed past me into the living room, Mark trailing behind her like a puppy. "Evelyn, we need to talk," she said, her voice crisp and businesslike. She sat on my sofa, the one Richard and I had picked out together, and opened her portfolio on the coffee table. "Mark and I have been doing a lot of thinking about the future. Your future, specifically." My blood ran cold. I remained standing, crossing my arms. "My future seems to be just fine, Tiffany." "What is this about?" She smiled, a condescending little tilt of her lips. "Well, that's the thing. It's fine now, but you're not getting any younger. This house is a lot for one person to manage. The upkeep, the property taxes, the maintenance. It's a burden. And what if something were to happen to you? What if you fell?" She let the question hang in the air, a thinly veiled threat disguised as concern. Mark finally spoke, his voice wavering. "Mom, we're just worried about you. We want to make sure you're taken care of." I looked at my son, at the earnest, worried expression on his face, and I saw that he actually believed the words Tiffany was putting in his mouth. He genuinely thought this was about my well-being. Tiffany tapped a glossy brochure in her portfolio. It was for a luxury senior living facility called Golden Meadows. The pictures showed smiling, silver-haired residents playing shuffleboard and taking watercolor painting classes. "We found this incredible place for you," Tiffany continued, her voice radiating false enthusiasm. "It has round-the-clock medical care, gourmet dining, social activities. You'd be so much safer and happier there. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." I stared at the brochure. The price for a single room was astronomical. It would require me to sell my house and liquidate nearly all of my assets. They weren't just suggesting I move. They were presenting me with a plan for my own displacement. They had already picked out my new cage. "And what happens to this house?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. This was the moment, the real reason for their visit. Tiffany's eyes lit up, a predatory gleam she couldn't hide. "Well, that's the best part. To afford a place like Golden Meadows, you'd need to sell the house. But we have a better idea. You can sign it over to us. We'll take over the mortgage of your life, so to speak. We'll handle all the bills, the taxes, everything. And in exchange, we'll make sure your expenses at Golden Meadows are covered for the rest of your life. It's the perfect solution. You get security, and we get a family home to build our future in. For your grandchildren." She said the last words with a triumphant flourish, as if she had just played the winning card. Mark looked at me, his eyes pleading. "It makes sense, Mom. This way, the house stays in the family. It's what Dad would have wanted." That was it, invoking Richard's name, using the memory of my husband to try and manipulate me into giving up the very home we built together. A dam of anger, frustration, and grief broke inside me. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. Tiffany's smile faltered. What did you say? I said no. This is my home. Richard and I built our lives here. I am not selling it. I am not signing it over to you. And I am most certainly not moving into a glorified nursing home so you can have a bigger place to store your designer shoes. The color drained from Mark's face. He had never heard me speak with such force. Tiffany, however, recovered quickly. Her face hardened, the charming facade melting away to reveal the cold, hard ambition beneath. Don't be ridiculous, Evelyn. This is a practical decision. It's the smartest thing to do. It may be practical for you, I shot back, but it's my life you're planning on liquidating. The discussion is over. I turned to walk toward the kitchen, my hands shaking. I needed to put a barrier between us. I needed to breathe. And that's when it happened. I had taken no more than 2 steps towards the kitchen when Tiffany's voice, sharp and venomous, cut through the air behind me. You selfish old woman. I stopped, my back still to her, every muscle in my body tensing. I could feel Mark's panicked energy, his silent plea for me to just ignore her, to let it go. But I couldn't. I turned around slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked directly at her, at the ugly sneer that had replaced her beautiful smile. What did you just call me? I asked, my voice low and trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years. Tiffany stood up, her 5'10" frame towering over me. She took a step closer, her eyes blazing with fury. The mask was not just off. It had been shattered into a million pieces. I called you what you are, she hissed, jabbing a finger in my direction. Selfish. You're sitting on this huge asset, this beautiful home, while your only son and his wife are struggling in a tiny condo. You'd rather rattle around in this empty museum by yourself than help your own family. You don't deserve this house. Every word was designed to wound, to make me feel small and guilty. She was twisting my love for my home into a character flaw, my independence into selfishness. I saw Mark in my peripheral vision, wringing his hands, his face pale with conflict. Mark, I said, my voice pleading, my eyes still locked on Tiffany. Are you going to let her speak to me this way? In my own home? He opened his mouth, a pathetic, stammering sound coming out. But Tiffany cut him off with a withering glare. Don't you dare try to hide behind him, she spat at me. This is between you and me. You have stood in our way for the last time. You are going to sign the papers, and you are going to get out of our way. She took another step, invading my personal space, her scent of expensive perfume suddenly cloying and suffocating. Her face was inches from mine. We need this house, Evelyn, and we are going to get it. The sheer audacity of it, the raw, naked entitlement, left me breathless. This wasn't a request anymore. It was a demand, a threat. A cool, clear wave of certainty washed over me, extinguishing the shaking in my hands. Get out of my house, I said. My voice was no longer trembling. It was as cold and hard as steel. Both of you. Now. Tiffany laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. We're not going anywhere until you listen to reason. And then it happened. As I turned my head away from her in dismissal, her hand flew up. The crack of her palm connecting with my cheek echoed in the cavernous silence of the living room. The shock was a physical blow, a white-hot explosion of pain and disbelief. My head snapped to the side. My cheek throbbed, a fiery testament to the violation that had just occurred. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Nothing made sense. My son's wife had just struck me. In that deafening silence that followed, I heard a small gasp from Mark, but he did nothing. He just stood there, paralyzed, a statue of inaction, while his mother was assaulted in front of him. That inaction hurt more than the slap itself. It was the ultimate betrayal. My eyes slowly focused back on Tiffany. She wasn't remorseful. She wasn't shocked at what she'd done. Her chest was heaving, her eyes were wild with rage, and in them I saw a flicker of satisfaction. She had finally broken the last taboo. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. And then, as if the physical assault wasn't enough, she held out her hand. Her palm was still red from hitting me. Her voice was flat, robotic, completely devoid of the fire from a moment before. "Give me your house keys." Something inside me snapped. It wasn't loud or violent. It was a quiet, terrifying click, the sound of a switch being flipped in my soul. The grief, the hurt, the confusion, it all evaporated, replaced by an arctic calm. I looked past her, at my son. "Mark," I said, my voice unnervingly steady. "You have 10 seconds to get her out of my house before I call the police, and have you both removed for assault and trespassing." The mention of the police finally seemed to jolt him from his stupor. Panic flared in his eyes. "Mom, no, please, let's just calm down," he pleaded, finally moving towards Tiffany, trying to pull her arm. "Tiffany, honey, we should go." But Tiffany wasn't finished. She shook him off, her eyes still locked on mine. She saw the change in me, the new hardness in my eyes, and it only seemed to fuel her rage. She didn't get what she wanted. I didn't crumble. I didn't cry. So she went for the kill. "You think you're so strong?" she sneered. "You're nothing. A lonely old widow in a house that's too big for her. Mark only tolerates you because he feels sorry for you. He told me so himself." I didn't flinch. I just held her gaze. I walked over to the front door, my movements deliberate and calm. I opened it wide, letting the cool evening air rush in. "Get out!" I repeated. Mark, finally realizing the situation was spiraling out of his control, grabbed Tiffany firmly by the arm. "We're leaving," he said through gritted teeth, practically dragging her towards the door. She struggled for a moment, still spewing venom. "This isn't over, Evelyn. You'll regret this." As they stumbled out onto the porch, I looked at my son's face one last time. I saw shame, fear, and a heartbreaking degree of weakness. He couldn't meet my eyes. I shut the door, turned the deadbolt, and leaned my forehead against the cool wood. My cheek was on fire. My heart felt like a block of ice. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I slid down to the floor, my back against the door, and in the crushing silence of my home, I finally understood. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was war. And I had just survived the first brutal battle. I thought that was the end of it for the night. I was so wrong. It was only the beginning. I sat on the floor, leaning against the front door for what felt like hours, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The throbbing in my cheek was a constant, physical reminder of the evening's horror. It wasn't just a slap. It was a declaration. It was Tiffany telling me, in the clearest possible terms, that I was no longer a person to be respected, but an obstacle to be removed. And my son's silence was his endorsement of that declaration. Eventually, the adrenaline faded, leaving behind a profound and chilling emptiness. I mechanically got up, walked to the kitchen, and held an ice pack to my face, staring at my reflection in the dark window. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were hard, her mouth set in a grim line. The soft, loving matriarch was gone. In her place was a survivor. My first coherent thought was practical. I went through the house and checked every lock on every window and door. I felt a tremor of fear, a primal vulnerability. They knew my home. They knew its weaknesses. Had I been foolish to think a simple deadbolt was enough? The thought was immediately followed by a wave of white-hot anger. I should not have to feel like a prisoner in my own home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Richard's armchair, the ice pack long since melted, and I made a plan. The first step was to protect myself. Financially, I knew, with absolute certainty, that their next attack would be on my resources. The next morning, I was at the bank the moment it opened. I sat down with the branch manager, a kind man named Mr. Henderson who had known Richard and me for years. With a calm I didn't feel, I explained that I needed to secure my accounts. We went through everything. I had foolishly added Mark as a co-signer to one of my credit cards years ago for emergencies. I had him removed immediately. I changed all my passwords and set up alerts for any transaction over $50. Mr. Henderson was discreet, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Is everything all right, Evelyn?" he asked gently. "Everything," I replied, my voice firm, "is about to be." As I left the bank, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "Mom, I am so sorry. Tiff was just stressed." "She didn't mean it. Please call me. We need to talk." I stared at the message, disgust coiling in my stomach. She didn't mean it. He was already rewriting history, minimizing the assault, protecting her. He wasn't sorry for what happened. He was sorry that there were consequences. I deleted the text without replying. Then another one came. "Mom, please, don't do this. You're tearing our family apart." My fingers trembled as I typed back a single sentence. "Your wife assaulted me, and you did nothing. There is no family left to tear apart." I blocked his number. Then, with a heavy heart, I blocked Tiffany's. It felt like an amputation, cutting off my own son. But I knew it was necessary for my survival. My next call was to Carol. I told her everything, my voice cracking for the first time as I recounted the slap. She was silent for a long moment after I finished. "Okay," she said, her voice all business. "First, you're going to a doctor to have that cheek documented. Second, you're calling a lawyer. Not tomorrow, not next week. Today. I have a name for you." She was right. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. This was a legal matter. Carol gave me the number for a lawyer named Arthur Davies, who specialized in elder law and estate protection. I made an appointment for the following day. That afternoon, the next phase of their attack began. My phone rang. It was my sister, Helen, from Florida. Her voice was frantic. "Evelyn! What in God's name is going on? I just got off the phone with Tiffany." She was sobbing. Absolutely hysterical. I closed my eyes. Of course. The smear campaign. "What did she tell you, Helen?" I asked, my voice weary. "She said you had some sort of episode. That you got confused and angry and you threw them out of the house for no reason. She said you've been forgetting things, acting paranoid. She's worried you have dementia or Alzheimer's. She said they were only trying to talk to you about getting some in-home help, and you flew into a rage. And it was brilliant. Diabolically brilliant. They weren't telling people Tiffany slapped me. They were building a narrative. I wasn't a victim. I was a mentally incompetent old woman, prone to violent outbursts. They were not the aggressors. They were the concerned, loving children trying to care for their ailing mother. I spent the next hour painstakingly explaining the truth to my sister. Thankfully, Helen knew me. She knew my mind was as sharp as ever. But the conversation left me shaken. How many other people had Tiffany called? How many of my friends and relatives were now questioning my sanity? They weren't just trying to take my house. They were trying to take my credibility, my reputation, my very identity. They were trying to erase me and replace me with their own fiction. The meeting with Arthur Davies the next day was a grim affair. He was a man in his late 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. I told him the entire story, from the first financial request to the slap, to the phone call from my sister. He listened without interruption, taking meticulous notes. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair. "This is a classic, textbook case of predatory familial abuse, Evelyn," he said, his voice calm but serious. "The financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation, and now the campaign to establish you as mentally incompetent. It's a well-worn playbook. They are laying the groundwork to file for a conservatorship." The word hung in the air, cold and menacing. A conservatorship. They wanted to have me legally declared an adult who couldn't make her own decisions. They wanted to become my legal guardians, with full control over my finances, my property, my life. They wanted to own me. "Can they do that?" I whispered. the fear I had been suppressing finally breaking through. "They can certainly try," Mr. Davies said. "They will find a doctor willing to write a report. They will get friends to sign affidavits attesting to your erratic behavior. It will be a fight, but we can fight back. We will document everything. We will get our own medical evaluation. We will prove that this is not about your health, but about their greed." I left his office feeling both terrified and empowered. I had an ally. I had a strategy. But I also had the sickening realization that my son, the boy I had raised and loved, was actively trying to strip me of my rights and my freedom. The naive woman who hosted Sunday dinners was well and truly gone. In her place was a reluctant warrior, preparing for the fight of her life. The weeks that followed were a surreal blend of psychological warfare and suffocating silence. On one hand, my world had shrunk. The blocked numbers of my son and his wife meant no more calls, no more texts. The house was quiet, the Sundays empty. But on the other hand, I could feel their presence everywhere, like a malevolent ghost. They were working in the shadows, poisoning the well, turning my own life into a weapon against me. The phone calls started coming from other people. Old family, friends, distant cousins. The conversations always started the same way, with feigned casualness. "Evelyn? Hi. Just calling to see how you are. We haven't heard from you in a while." But then the tone would shift. "You know, Tiffany called the other day. She's so worried about you, dear. Are you sure you're eating properly? Maybe you should let the kids help out a bit more." It was exhausting. With each call, I had to calmly and rationally dismantle Tiffany's web of lies, explaining the truth without sounding hysterical or, ironically, paranoid. Some believed me. Others, I could tell, were left with a seed of doubt. The phrase, "there are two sides to every story," became my personal hell. They had successfully framed this as a he said, she said situation, a family drama rather than what it was. An assault and an attempted theft of a life's work. My ally through all of this was Carol. She was my fortress. She would listen to me vent after each infuriating phone call, her expression grim. "They're isolating you," she said, her nurse's mind analyzing the strategy. "It's a classic abuser tactic. Cut the victim off from their support system so they feel alone and helpless. Then they can swoop in as the saviors." Mr. Davies had me start a journal, documenting every single interaction, every phone call, every strange car that drove slowly past my house. "We need a record of their harassment," he'd explained. "Every little piece helps build our case." So I wrote everything down, my hand cramping as I filled page after page. It felt like I was scripting my own horror movie. Then, one rainy Tuesday morning, the atom bomb dropped. It arrived in the form of a registered letter, the formal, intimidating envelope making my stomach clench before I even opened it. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My hand shook as I tore it open. It was a formal notification. Mark and Tiffany were filing a petition with the court for an emergency temporary conservatorship over my person and my estate. I sank into a kitchen chair, the letter rattling in my hand. It was real. They were actually doing it. The letter was filled with legalese, but the message was brutally clear. It cited evidence of my rapidly declining mental state, my inability to manage my financial affairs, and my increasing paranoia and hostility towards loved ones. It claimed I was a danger to myself and that my assets were at risk of being squandered. It was accompanied by a sworn declaration, signed by my son, Mark Richard Thompson. Reading his signature on that document was a physical pain, worse than the slap. It was a cold, legal dismemberment of our relationship. He was trying to have me declared a non-person, Mr. Davies had prepared me for this, but the reality of it was a gut punch that knocked the wind out of me. I immediately called him. He was calm, reassuring. "This is the move we expected, Evelyn. It's aggressive, but it's also a sign of desperation. Now, they have to prove their case in court, and we are going to be ready." But that wasn't the atom bomb. The real payload was what came next. That evening, as I was sitting numbly with Carol, trying to process the legal documents, my sister Helen called again. This time, she was weeping. "Evelyn, oh, Evelyn, I don't know what to think," she sobbed. "What is it, Helen?" I asked, my heart pounding. "It's Tiffany. She just called me. She told me the real reason they're so worried, the reason they have to take legal action." She took a shuddering breath. "Evelyn, she's pregnant." The world stopped. Pregnant. A baby. A grandchild. The one thing I had longed for. The one emotional tool she had wielded against me from the very beginning. It was a masterstroke of evil genius. Now their entire narrative was reframed. They weren't greedy children trying to steal from their mother. They were expectant parents, desperate to protect their family and their unborn child's inheritance from an unstable, mentally ill grandmother. They were trying to secure a future for my grandchild. How could anyone argue with that? How could a judge look at a pregnant woman and not feel sympathy? "She said you've become a danger," Helen continued, her voice thick with tears. "That they're scared to even bring a baby into this situation. That they need to take control of the estate to make sure there's a safe and stable home for the child." I was silent. I couldn't speak. The chess move was so brilliant, so utterly devastating, that I could only sit there in stunned admiration of its cruelty. She had just checkmated me. Carol, seeing my face drain of all color, took the phone from my hand. "Helen, listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "You are being manipulated. Hang up the phone and do not speak to that woman again." She hung up and turned to me. Her face was grim. "Is it true?" I whispered, the word tasting like ash. "Do you think she's really pregnant?" Carol looked at me, her eyes full of a fierce, protective fire. "I think," she said slowly, "that a woman who is willing to have her husband petitioned to have his own mother declared incompetent is capable of doing and saying absolutely anything to get what she wants. We don't assume anything. We investigate." And just like that, the terms of the war had shifted once again. It wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about a child. A child who may or may not even exist, but whose ghost was now the most powerful player on the board. The news of Tiffany's alleged pregnancy hung over me like a toxic cloud. It was a brilliant, strategic move that shifted the entire narrative of our conflict. In the eyes of the world, I was no longer a victim defending her home. I was a potentially unstable old woman standing in the way of her grandchild's future. The sympathy of our extended family, which had been tentatively on my side, now swung wildly in Tiffany's direction. I received calls and emails, all with the same underlying message. "Evelyn, for the sake of the baby, just give them what they want. Don't let your pride destroy this family." They couldn't see the puppet strings. They only saw the swelling belly of a mother-to-be and a son trying to build a nest for his new family. It was a story as old as time, and it was working perfectly. Even I, for a dark and desperate moment, wavered. What if she was telling the truth? What if I was so blinded by my anger that I was about to deprive my own grandchild of a family home, of a relationship with his grandmother? The thought was a dagger to my heart. Mark, of course, was the primary weapon in this new phase of their campaign. He started leaving me voicemails again, his number unblocked by my lawyer's advice to document all contact. His voice was no longer pleading or angry. It was filled with a deep, sorrowful disappointment. "Mom," he'd say, his voice thick with manufactured emotion, "I can't believe you're doing this to us. To your own grandchild. Tiffany is under so much stress because of you. The doctor says it's not good for the baby. All we want is to provide a stable home. The home Dad would have wanted for his grandson. Is that too much to ask?" He was a virtuoso, playing on my guilt, my love for Richard, my yearning for a grandchild. It was emotional blackmail of the highest order. It was Carol who snapped me out of it. She came over one afternoon and found me sitting in the dark, staring at a photo of Mark as a little boy. "Stop it," she said, flipping on the lights. Stop torturing yourself. We don't know anything for certain yet. And until we do, we operate on facts, not on Tiffany's soap opera script. She was right. I had let them get inside my head. Miss Davies echoed Carol's sentiment. The pregnancy changes the emotional stakes, but not the legal ones, he assured me over the phone. The petition is for a conservatorship based on your alleged incompetence. Whether she is pregnant or not is legally irrelevant to the question of your mental state. We stay the course. We prove you are competent. But Carol had planted a seed. We investigate. The idea took root in my mind. If this pregnancy was a lie, exposing it would not only be my salvation, it would be the ultimate destruction of their credibility. But how? I couldn't exactly demand a medical certificate. I felt helpless, trapped by the intimacy of the lie. This is where Carol's practicality shone. Okay, she said, pulling a notepad and pen from her purse. Let's be logical. When is she due? Who is her doctor? Has anyone actually seen an ultrasound? Where is she registered for baby gifts? We had nothing. Just Tiffany's word, channeled through a network of gossip. We can't just ask, I said in frustration. They'll just accuse me of being a paranoid, harassing old woman. You're right, Carol said, tapping the pen on her chin. So, we don't ask. We watch. Her plan was simple and a little bit terrifying. For the next few weeks, we became amateur detectives. Carol, who was retired, had plenty of time on her hands. She would take different routes on her daily walks, routes that just happened to take her past Mark and Tiffany's condo building. She'd sit at the coffee shop across the street, nursing a latte for 2 hours, just watching. I felt a deep sense of shame, stooping to this level, spying on my own son. But then I'd remember the slap, the legal petition, the coldness in Tiffany's eyes, and the shame would be replaced by a grim resolve. At first, we saw nothing out of the ordinary. Tiffany would leave for work in the morning, dressed in stylish, loose-fitting clothing that could easily conceal a small baby bump. Mark would come and go, looking perpetually stressed. But then, Carol noticed something odd. She doesn't walk like a pregnant woman, Carol reported one evening. I've been a nurse for 40 years, Evelyn. I've seen thousands of pregnant women. There's a certain way they carry themselves, a shift in their center of gravity. She doesn't have it. She's still striding around in 4-inch heels like she's on a runway. It was a small thing, but it was something. Then came the second clue. I have a distant cousin, Mary, who I've always been close to. She was one of the few people who had called me, listened to my entire story, and said, Evelyn, I believe you. She mentioned she was going to a wine-tasting charity event that weekend, an event sponsored by the very marketing firm Tiffany worked for. On a hunch, I asked her to keep an eye out for Tiffany. Mary called me on Saturday night, her voice a hushed, excited whisper. Evelyn, you are not going to believe this. Tiffany is here, and I've been watching her for an hour. Not only is she not showing at all, but I saw her, with my own 2 eyes, have a full glass of champagne during the toast, and I'm pretty sure I saw her sneaking a cigarette on the balcony with a colleague. My heart leaped into my throat. A pregnant woman, especially one who had supposedly endured the stress Tiffany claimed I was putting her under, would not be drinking champagne and smoking cigarettes. It was reckless. It was unbelievable. Or it was a lie. This was more than a hunch. It was tangible evidence, but it was still just my cousin's word against hers. We needed something more concrete, something undeniable. Mr. Davies was cautiously optimistic when I told him, This is good, Evelyn. It supports our theory, but we need irrefutable proof. He paused for a moment. I think it's time we escalate. I work with a private investigator, a very discreet, very professional woman named Miss Albright. It's an expense, but if she can get us photographic evidence of Tiffany behaving in a way that contradicts her pregnancy, it could be the key to blowing their entire case apart. I didn't hesitate. Do it, I said. The thought of hiring a private investigator to tail my son's wife was something out of a crime novel. a surreal twist in my quiet life. But my quiet life was already over. I was in a war, and it was time to bring in heavy artillery. Miss Albright was a ghost. I never met her. Mr. Davies handled everything. For a week, I heard nothing. The silence was nerve-wracking. Every day felt like a year. The court date for the conservatorship hearing was looming. Time was running out. Finally, Mr. Davies called me into his office. He didn't say anything on the phone, just that I needed to come in. When I arrived, he closed the door and slid a large manila envelope across his desk towards me. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely open it. Inside were a dozen high-resolution photographs. My breath caught in my chest. The first few photos showed Tiffany entering a high-end lingerie store. The next showed her leaving with a bag. The next photos were the ones that changed everything. They were taken through the window of a trendy downtown bar. Tiffany was sitting at a table with a friend, laughing. In front of her was not a glass of water, but a martini, complete with an olive. Another photo showed her lighting a cigarette, but it was the last photo that made me gasp. It was a long-distance shot, clearly taken with a powerful zoom lens. It showed Tiffany at home, in her condo, visible through their large, uncurtained living room window. She was standing in front of a full-length mirror, turning to the side. She had lifted her sweater, and she was unstrapping something from around her abdomen. A padded, flesh-colored prosthetic. A fake pregnancy belly. The lie wasn't just a lie. It was a costume. A prop in the sick play she was directing. Mr. Davies looked at me, his expression grim. "I believe," he said softly, "we have what we need." Holding the photographs in my hand was one of the most surreal moments of my life. The image of Tiffany unstrapping that prosthetic belly was so grotesquely theatrical, so profoundly deceitful, that it seemed to defy reality. My mind reeled. She hadn't just told a lie. She had constructed an elaborate physical deception. She had been wearing a fake stomach, perhaps for weeks, to fool my son, our family, and ultimately, the legal system. The depth of her sociopathy was breathtaking. My initial shock quickly gave way to a cold, hard rage. This woman was a monster. A calculating, manipulative monster who was using the sacred idea of a new life as a tool for financial gain. All the pity I had felt for Mark, all the residual love that made me grieve for our relationship, evaporated in that moment. He wasn't just a victim of her manipulation. He was a willing accomplice, too blinded by his infatuation or too weak to question the most obvious inconsistencies. Mr. Davies let me sit with the revelation for a few moments before he spoke. "This changes the game, Evelyn," he said, his voice bringing me back to the stark reality of his office. "This isn't just evidence against the conservatorship anymore. This is proof of a conspiracy to commit fraud. They are attempting to defraud you and the court." He laid out the new strategy. We would not reveal our hand just yet. The conservatorship hearing was scheduled for the following week. Tiffany and Mark would walk into that courtroom, believing they had the ultimate trump card, the sympathetic, pregnant mother-to-be. They would build their entire case around it, and we would let them. We would let them lie under oath. We would let them dig their own graves before we presented the shovel. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Peterson, is known for being aggressive and theatrical, Mr. Davies explained. He will undoubtedly put Tiffany on the stand to play the part of the distraught, worried, expectant mother. That is when we will strike. The plan was terrifying. It required me to sit in a courtroom and listen to my son and his wife perjure themselves, to assassinate my character, to paint me as a monster, all while I held the truth in my hands. It would be the hardest performance of my life. The days leading up to the hearing were agonizing. I lived in a state of suspended animation, the secret knowledge buzzing under my skin like a live wire. I had to pretend that I knew nothing. Mark left me another voicemail, the most manipulative one yet. "Mom, the hearing is on Tuesday. It's not too late to stop this. Just sign the house over. We can tell the lawyers it was all a misunderstanding. We can be a family again, for the baby. Please, Mom, don't make us do this." I saved the voicemail. It was another piece of evidence, another nail for their coffin. The night before the hearing, Carol came over with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "You're not to drink any, but I am," she declared, pouring herself a generous glass. "Tomorrow, you are going to walk into that courtroom with your head held high. You are not the crazy one. You are not the selfish one. You are the one who is telling the truth. Don't you ever forget that." We sat in comfortable silence for a long time. Her steadfast presence was the anchor that kept me from drifting away on a sea of anxiety. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with meticulous care. I chose a simple, elegant navy blue suit. I styled my hair. I put on a string of pearls Richard had given me for our 25th anniversary. My reflection in the mirror was that of a calm, composed, dignified woman. It was a suit of armor. Inside, my stomach was churning, but I would not let them see it. When I walked into the courthouse, the scene was exactly as I'd expected. Mark and Tiffany were there with their lawyer. Tiffany was dressed in a soft, light blue maternity dress, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. It was a masterful piece of costuming. She looked vulnerable, maternal, and completely sympathetic. Mark stood beside her, his arm around her, playing the part of the protective husband and father-to-be. Several of my relatives were there, including my sister Helen. They gave me looks filled with pity and disappointment. They had chosen their side. The hearing began. Their lawyer, Mr. Peterson, opened with a powerful, emotional statement. He painted a heartbreaking picture of a loving son and his pregnant wife, forced to take this drastic measure to protect their family from a mother who had tragically lost her grip on reality. He spoke of my paranoia, my aggression, my financial irresponsibility. He made me sound like a raging lunatic. Then, he called his first witness, my son. Seeing Mark take the stand and swear an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, was a moment of profound and soul-crushing sorrow. He proceeded to lie, pathologically and convincingly. He recounted fabricated stories of my forgetfulness. He described my decision to secure my finances as proof of my paranoia. He told the judge, his voice cracking, that his biggest fear was for the safety of his wife and unborn child. Mr. Davies' cross-examination was brief and pointed. "Mr. Thompson, you love your wife, don't you?" "Of course," Mark said. "And you believe she is pregnant with your child?" "Yes, absolutely." "And everything you are doing today, it is to protect her and that child?" "Yes," Mark said, his voice filled with righteous conviction. "That's all that matters." Then, Mr. Peterson called his star witness, Tiffany. She walked to the stand with a slow, careful gait, one hand on her back as if to support her aching spine. Her performance was flawless. She wept as she described my verbal abuse. She spoke of her fear, her stress, her constant worry about the baby. She rested her hand on her stomach. "All I want," she whispered, tears streaming down her face, "is for my baby to have a safe home, to have the grandmother he deserves. But I'm so scared of her. I'm scared of what she might do." The courtroom was silent, captivated. I could feel the judge's sympathy. I could see my relatives dabbing their eyes with tissues. They were winning. It was time. Mr. Davies stood up. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, his voice gentle, "you have testified that you are currently pregnant, is that correct?" "Yes," Tiffany sobbed. "And you are approximately, what, 4 months along?" "Almost 5, she corrected, a touch of pride in her voice. "I see. Mr. Davies walked back to our table and picked up the manila envelope. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. This was it. "Your Honor, Mr. Davies said, addressing the judge, "we would like to enter into evidence these photographs, marked as Exhibit A." The moment Mr. Davies placed the manila envelope on the witness stand in front of Tiffany, the entire atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. It was as if the air itself had become electrified. Tiffany stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake, her tear-streaked face suddenly frozen in a mask of confusion and dawning horror. Her lawyer, Mr. Peterson, jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Relevance? We have no idea what is in that envelope. This is a surprise tactic." The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Carmichael, peered over her glasses at Mr. Davies. "Counselor, where are you going with this?" "Your Honor, Mr. Davies said, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "Mrs. Thompson's pregnancy has been presented as the primary emotional justification for this entire proceeding. The contents of this envelope are not only relevant, they speak directly to the credibility of this witness and the fraudulent nature of this entire petition." Judge Carmichael hesitated for a second, her curiosity piqued. "Objection overruled. But be careful where you're treading, Mr. Davies. The witness may open the envelope." My hands were clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. I watched Tiffany's trembling fingers fumble with the clasp. She pulled out the stack of glossy 8x10 photographs. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the soft rustle of the paper. I saw her eyes scan the first photo, the one of her at the bar. A martini glass raised to her lips. A flicker of panic crossed her face. She shuffled to the next one, lighting a cigarette on the balcony. Her breathing became shallow. Her lawyer was already moving toward her, a look of deep concern on his face. But then she reached the last photo, the one taken through her condo window, the one where she was standing in front of the mirror, her shirt lifted, her hands unstrapping the flesh-colored padded prosthetic from her flat stomach. A sound escaped her lips, a strangled, guttural gasp. The color drained completely from her face, leaving it a pasty, sickly white. The photographs slipped from her numb fingers and scattered across the floor of the witness box. A wave of murmurs and gasps rippled through the courtroom. People in the back rows stood up, craning their necks to see. My sister Helen let out a choked cry. Mark, sitting at the plaintiff's table, looked utterly bewildered. He hadn't seen the photos yet. He just saw his wife, who a moment ago was the picture of maternal vulnerability, now looking like a cornered animal. Mr. Peterson rushed to the witness box, gathering the photos. His face went from confusion to shock to a deep, angry red as he looked at the final picture. He turned and gave Tiffany a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He had been played, too. Mr. Davies let the chaos simmer for a perfect, dramatic beat before he spoke, his voice cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice dripping with ice, "could you please explain to the court what you are doing in that last photograph? Is that a standard procedure for an expectant mother?" Tiffany couldn't speak. She just shook her head, her eyes wide with terror, looking wildly from the judge to her lawyer to Mark. Mark, finally understanding something was terribly wrong, stood up and walked towards the witness box. He picked up one of the scattered photos from the floor. It was the one of the prosthetic. I watched his face as he processed the image. I saw the confusion, the denial, and then the slow, dawning, soul-crushing comprehension. His entire body seemed to deflate, as if his bones had suddenly turned to dust. He looked at Tiffany, his wife, the woman he had adored, the woman he had betrayed his own mother for. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face was a mask of utter devastation. "Mrs. Thompson," Mr. Davies pressed on, his voice relentless. "Is it not true that you have been perpetrating a fraud upon this court, upon your husband, and upon your entire family? Is it not true that you are not, and have never been, pregnant?" Tiffany finally found her voice, but it was a pathetic, broken shriek. "No! It's a lie! Those photos are fake, they're doctored." But her denial was weak, unconvincing. The evidence was right there, scattered at her feet. The judge, who had been watching this unfold with a stony expression, slammed her gavel down. "Order! Order in this court!" she boomed. She looked at Tiffany. Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Mrs.